And why did you choose architecture out of anything?
Why did I choose? My family said I had my head in the clouds and that was the best profession, but I'm not sure whether that's true or not.
So wait, you didn't make the decision?
So I would work really hard and get 61, and then I would work even harder on the next one and get 58. You almost need to be a jack of all trades. You need to be an accountant to a client that wants to understand the budget. You need to be a builder to try and understand the details. But I think most importantly, you almost need to be a psychologist. You need to understand what your client wants without them actually often understanding what they need or want.
In this video, I spoke to 3 South African architects who do not only own their own practices, but are also lecturers at some of South Africa's best universities. In fact, they all lectured me. In this video, they'll be talking about the experiences from when they finished high school to now when they're fully fledged professional architects. They will also be showing you some of the projects they worked on during their careers. This is part 1 of being an architect in South Africa. Can you tell me about your journey from when you decided to study architecture to right now?
Sure.
Yeah.
Quite a long journey. Well, not that long, but so when I decided to study was, I suppose when I was in matric, applied to study architecture and I came to Wits University and I studied here for, I suppose it was 6 years, including a year out.
6 years, so the bachelor's, then the honors and the master's.
We didn't have an honors and masters then, so it was 2 bachelor's degrees. So it was a BAS and a BArch. So we didn't get a master's. I did a master's later on in urban design. So, and after that, I worked at Kotsimoleko Architects in Laudium and in Pretoria.
When was this?
Sure, it was 2003 or 2004.
Yeah, when we were literally born.
When you were born. You're making me feel old. So, and I worked there for a few years. In my first job, well, that was actually my second job. As a student, I worked for Charles van Bedar in Melville. And I worked at Kotso for 2 years and then I went overseas.
Where did you go?
I worked in Edinburgh. So I worked in Scotland for a commercial firm. We worked mainly on Royal Bank of Scotland. But I didn't do any of that work. They gave me all sorts of small jobs all over the country, which was quite fun. And yeah, after that, I worked at Mashabane Rose Architects. And then I joined Michael Scholes. And from there have taken over that firm, which is now my own firm, Scholes Range here, Architects.
Sure. I was a very dedicated student, and I worked really hard at all subjects, so it was difficult for me to tell what I should be focusing on. And I wasn't always good at art. That's something that didn't jump to the fore until about grade 10, grade 11. Like I suddenly got good at art and I don't know where it came from. And because I hadn't been used to thinking about art as something I could do, I was thinking of being a doctor because that's what you do when you have good marks. So I'd sent my application to Wits, UCT. I had gotten into medical school and I had gotten a very early acceptance. So I had a bit of indifference about it. But, you know, that's what you do when you have good marks. You go to medicine, engineering, law. So I chose medicine. It would have been a disaster. But it was all done. It was settled. And it was around December now when everything's over. We have our marks. I was just waiting to go to medical school in February the following year. And I was doing a painting at home. I had an easel out on the patio and I was just painting and listening to music. And then a family friend who is an architect came and he saw my painting and he was like, "What are you doing next year?" And I was like, "I'm studying medicine." And he was like, that is not you. So he sat me down. He was an architect himself, is an architect. He explained what the degree was about, what kind of career I could have. And by the end of the conversation, I was sold. He left. I withdrew my acceptance to med school, and then I had to reapply for architecture.
The following year?
Yes, because I think I had gotten a provisional acceptance like in grade 11. Yeah, back then it was different to now, because it was quite a long time ago. I think it was, and it's provisional, so you have to, it's dependent on maintaining the same marks. But I had gotten accepted really quite early. And it must have been grade 11, because I still had time for the portfolio and everything. So, the rest is really history. I really enjoyed doing the portfolio. I never doubted from that conversation onwards that I was doing the right thing, and it has been the only thing that I can really imagine a long-term kind of career in. Like, I can add other things to architecture, but it's the core thing.
Obviously, towards the end of high school, I think I was in grade 11, where I decided I wanted to be an architect. I studied in Pretoria, at the University of Pretoria. I think around grade 11, I decided, I've kind of gone through some psychometric tests and spoken to some architects, and decided architecture was something I really wanted to study. I think first year was quite an adjustment. It was quite difficult, but I think by kind of second and third year, I started to kind of find kind of my space a bit in the curriculum. I really enjoyed studying. Great studio culture in Pretoria, and I think I really enjoyed that. And I think I would have battled a lot more had I not been working with people in the studio and spending a lot of time with other people working together. And when I finished, started working, I moved to Johannesburg. I started working for Mashibani Rose Architects. Worked for them for about 4 years. Worked on some very interesting projects. Got to work on Lily's Leaf a bit. They had really, really interesting projects, and quite sort of significant projects for Johannesburg and South Africa at the time. So and got to kind of see behind the scenes on how decisions and detailing was kind of done, which I really appreciate. After that, I started working for Khongelani. One of the first projects I did was the Wits Art Museum. With them was also a great project. It was a very complicated project because there was not just one existing building that we had to kind of change, but three that we had to bring together and change into a museum. So a lot of time spent on site working with the contractor. There was a lot of discovering sort of structure and things we didn't know were there. So there was a lot of time spent on site. So a lot of shifting in details and changing details, and a lot of decisions had to be made on site. But a very rewarding project to work on. After that, I started working for them part-time. And for the first year or so, I worked for another architect also part-time, John McGuinness Architects. He specialized in hotel work. It was quite interesting because I think he was relocating to Cape Town and kind of retiring and making his practice a bit smaller. At the same time, I was wanting to kind of start my own practice. So I think I bought some of the equipment that he had, like printers and things like that. So that was quite helpful. So after he kind of retired and closed down his office, I started working myself part-time as well as Khongelani part-time. I found that it was quite a nice sort of easy, and I think it can be quite daunting working for yourself and having to kind of find your own work and money and income. So that was quite a sort of an easy sort of into starting your own practice. I did that for probably about 4 or 5 years, maybe as much as 6, probably about 5 years. In which case I started leaving. I left Nina and Fiona's office at Khongelani. I started working sort of full-time for myself on my own project. I did that for about a year or two, and then got asked offered a position, or offered to interview for a position, which I got at Wits, and started teaching part-time. So again, for a few years, running my own practice part-time and teaching part-time. which I really enjoyed. And I found I've just kind of now sort of upped my teaching time more and more the more I started teaching. And that's where I am now.
And why did you choose architecture out of anything?
Why did I choose? My family said I had my head in the clouds and that was the best profession, but I'm not sure whether that's true or not.
So you didn't make the decision?
No, I did make that decision. They just said, oh, you should be an architect, your head's in the clouds. But I grew up with architecture in the house. My great-grandfather was an architect. Many of his pictures were up on the walls. I had a great uncle who was an architect. My father was a contractor, not in buildings and roads, but there was sort of architecture and buildings around me.
So it ran in the family, basically?
Yeah, it was in the family.
Okay, you already answered it. Okay. But did you have any doubts at some point while studying or while working that architecture might not be for you?
I loved the degree, and to be honest, I think if I hadn't loved it so much, I probably would have partied more. I probably would have done a lot of the things that, caused my friends maybe not to reach the finish line. But my love for what I was doing was really there from day one. The only thing that frustrated me was not studying. I had a really rough undergrad. Not because, when I look back, I was used to just excelling at whatever I chose to work really hard at. And with architecture, it really wasn't like that. It has to click. It's not just about working hard. So I would work really hard and get 61, and then I would work even harder on the next one and get 58. And so I was always passing, but I was frustrated and I was wondering, I just wasn't used to not doing well. There was just this disconnect between the effort and the outcome, which really confused me. And by the end of third year, with that kind of anxiety, I knew I loved it, but it just wasn't showing. But finally, in my last review of third year, a lecturer said to me, I got 63 or something like that again. She said to me, but there are lots of other creative professions you could do. You could be a singer, you could be an actress. And she didn't even say interior design. She chose acting and things that were far. And I really took that in. And that just really broke me, because I had been frustrated all along. Even though I was loving what I was doing, there was a level of frustration. And then when she said that, I thought, okay, maybe I really want this thing, but maybe it's not for me. So I actually left architecture after third year, and I did stuff around property. I worked in property development, property leasing, different sort of business things. And I never was really fulfilled by it. But again, I just worked hard at everything I did. And I was, in a nutshell, I was just unhappy until I came back.
What do you think made your first year difficult?
I remember, so a few things. I remember one of the first sort of introductory sort of lessons or introductory welcome kind of speeches for the head of department at the time was Khongelani. And he said, and there were parents there as well, and he said, don't be surprised when your children that are studying here suddenly become very critical of everything. That's one thing that they have to learn. When you start accepting that, not accepting that, but understanding that kind of critique is a way of improvement, it becomes easier. But I think when you first start, you feel like you're sort of designing something and you're just getting critique back and not not much positive feedback. So I think that was difficult. I also found structures and construction very difficult.
And you're a construction lecturer now?
I'm a construction lecturer now. I failed first year construction, and I think it was it took me a long time to kind of figure out figure out what was going on. I think I was so obsessed with the detail and trying to understand these small details. I remember spending ages trying to understand how a window frame would fit in a brickwork wall instead of understanding the bigger picture. And I think the blessing in that has been, I understand what it's like not to understand. So I try and teach in a way that I feel that can, where students can get to a point where they realize that they don't understand and try and guide them to steps to get them to understand.
What made you realize or decide that it was the right thing for you?
But I still don't know if it is the right thing. Is anyone ever sure in architecture? I think it's one of those where you grow to enjoy it more. I think you've got to find your niche in architecture. There's many different places you can work and many different styles of architecture. So you can go more commercial, or you can do what I have, and it's more practice, which I far prefer to the more commercial world.
Like, looking in retrospect, in those days, do you know why perhaps you didn't perform as well as you wanted to? Because I know for a lot of people, they went from getting 90s in high school, then as soon as they came here, just dropped completely. Yeah. Also, this whole thing of working very hard and not doing well was a pain which is really relatable.
Yes.
Do you think it's like perhaps certain people look at architecture in a different way? Like, let's say you're normally an analytical person, then as soon as you start basically blending in with the creativity becomes quite a challenge. Is that the case?
I think architecture is just a course where you have to be patient with yourself. Because the thing I think about architects, that it's like being an architect is like a gene that's like in your DNA. And because as I reflect on it, I think it's an odd combination of talents, because you have to be very practical, but then you also have to be very creative, and you have to be a really hard worker. But you also have to be able to let things be. And so there's this odd combination of things that an architect needs to be. And I think we don't come in with those things like in the right balance. Some of us come in more practical or more creative, and it takes a while for everything to find like its balance for you to actually produce something excellent. And some people are closer to it in undergrad, maybe also because of being exposed to it. Maybe they had a parent who was an architect, and other people have never seen a scale ruler before when they come in. So I think the penny just drops for different people at different times. And for me, like in postgrad, I got the marks that I had wanted all along. But I think that's because I just accepted myself. Like when I came back, I was just like, look, I was never failing. So what was the big deal? What difference does it really make what mark I get? I was never failing. And as soon as I had that attitude, then I got great marks. So I think it's a course where your mental state comes through your work, because it's creative, so much more than in other professions. So if you are being anxious and hard on yourself and all that, it's going to come through, and you're not going to do as well as you would have if you had just relaxed.
So people should just relax.
Yes. Yes.
Did you have any doubts at some point that architecture is not for you?
No.
Like never. Ever?
No, I knew it was what I wanted to do. I think I was fortunate with that, because I had a lot of classmates who were really not convinced, and that's a very, very hard degree to do and to complete if you're not sure it's what you want to do. I mean, I did the sort of high school psychometric tests, and it said I was kind of strong in architecture and possibly landscape architecture. I remember speaking to a landscape architecture, and it was probably the most kind of depressing conversations I've ever had. He basically said to me, there's absolutely no work, don't do it. And then I kind of started looking a little bit more towards architecture, and I remember speaking to an architect when I was kind of considering studying architecture. And somebody had explained architecture in a whole lot of different ways that I really just kind of fell in love with the idea of architecture. But one of the things he said was, you almost need to be a jack of all trades. You need to be an accountant to a client that wants to understand the budget. You need to be a builder to try and understand the details. But I think most importantly, you almost need to be a psychologist. You need to understand what your client wants without them actually often understanding what they need or want. So they have a broad idea, but you have to really kind of take those ideas that they're not fully aware of and create something for them that you know they're going to want. And I think that's probably one of my favorite sort of aspects of architecture, is creating space that changes people's lifestyles without possibly them realizing it, and improving it without them realizing it. So I think I always had that in the back of my mind. So yeah. I don't think I ever had any doubts.
So that was part 1 of the Being an Architect in South Africa series. Lol. So that was the first video of the series. I hope that you found it helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Khongelani N. And if you want to see part 2 of this video, click on the video on the right.